Okay guys, for the weft, I have a variety of colors of yarn for you to use, and everybody's going to be using a long plastic needle. This needle has to be returned to me at the end of every class because all of my classes are going to be needing to use this. So on one end, you can notice that there's a hole in it. The hole is called the eye of the needle. You want to take your yarn you want to take your yarn and put the end of the yarn through the eye of the needle, and you don't want to pull like the whole thing through there. You just want to pull like a couple inches out through the one end of the needle like this, through the one end of the eye, and then we're going to knot it onto here so it doesn't fall off for you guys while you're working, but you may need to cut it off at the end of class to clean up, so we don't want to waste a whole bunch of yarn. So check out how we're going to knot this. I'm going to do one over the other. I'm going to bring the short end over the long end. Notice I just made a little loop when I did that. I'm going to bring this little short end around and through that hole, right? And I just made a little knot, and I'm just going to pull it onto there. I'm going to do that same thing again. We're going to double knot it. So I'm going to cross it over, bring it around through the loop, and I'm going to tie it on, okay? And now I'm ready to start weaving. So we're adding on the weft at this point, and it really doesn't matter which end that you start at. And the pattern that we're going to be following is over, under, over, under. So we're going to be weaving on both sides. So I'm going to take my needle over under each and every other one of these strings, and then I'm going to flip it onto the other side and do the same thing. Okay, so I'm going to choose to start under on this one. So that means the next one's over, under, every other one. It's very important that you follow the pattern. Okay, so if you take a look at that, you can see, I can look back and see, okay, my needle is underneath every other one, okay, every other string there. So I'm going to pull this the whole way through. I'm going to leave just a little bit of extra hanging out the bottom there, okay? And now I'm going to push all of this down as close to those notches at the bottom as I possibly can get them. And then I'm going to notice the last thing that I did here. The last thing is I went under. So I'm gonna flip my loom over, and that means since the last thing I did was under, the first thing I have to do is go over this warp string. So I'm gonna go over, under, every other one. I always stop before I go on and like look. Did I skip any? Did I accidentally go over two or under two? If I did, it's gonna mess up my weaving. It'll kind of make a hole in my bag. So I don't really want that to happen. So I always double check. Once I know it's good, I pull it the whole way through. And you don't wanna pull it like really, really tight right here, okay? You just wanna pull it enough so that it really fits comfortably around the cardboard, right? If you pull it really tight, when we go to take these off the loom, the cardboard, they won't want to come off. Okay, so the last thing I ended on here was under, so I'm going to flip it back over to the side I started on, and I'm going to go over, right? I can also tell that by looking at the last thing I did down here. Remember, the last thing I did here was under, so I want to go opposite. Over, under, over, under. You're always doing the opposite of what you did last. Okay, now I'm on to the other side. Again, I'm doing opposite of what I did last. Check it out. The last thing I did on this side was I went under first. So this time I need to go over. Okay, always stop. Make sure you went on over and under every other one. Make sure you didn't skip any, and make sure it is in fact the opposite of what you did last time. Then pull your string through, or your yarn, and then do you notice that there's like a gap here? We don't want that gap. We want to kind of start pushing these down with our fingernails, and then you basically just continue on that until you run out of yarn. All right, so I got to the point where I have this entire piece of yarn woven through on both sides, and I have it all scrunched down. I have it scrunched down to the point where if you look closely, you really can't even see the weft strings, or I'm sorry, the warp strings coming through this like peach colored yarn, right? And that's the way that it should be. You should be scrunching it down, not so hard that you're like pulling it off the loom, but just enough so that you can't see that brown or whatever color your warp string is through there. And now we're ready to tie on some new string. So I went back through as much as I possibly could. I'm not gonna be able to make it back through on this side the whole way. So that's how I know how to stop. And I'm gonna cut off the yarn from here. I'm gonna cut right at the inside of that knot, right up against the eye of the needle. I don't wanna cut the needle and hurt it, but I'm just gonna kind of let go of those couple of pieces, set my needle down, and now I can grab another piece of yarn. So I measured out my yarn, it's another 2 arms length. And so now I'm gonna take this end of the peach and this end of the brown, and we're gonna tie a square knot. So don't let this scare you, it's really, really simple. Just think about when you first start tying your shoes, right? You have 2 shoelaces, you cross them over, you bring one around the other, right? Try to keep these 2 strings the same length, okay? So just don't pull the one that's really long as you can. Try to keep them the same length or it gets confusing. Then I'm gonna cross them the other way. So let's redo that last part. So I'll just use the colors. I'm gonna cross the brown over the orange, right? So they're just in an X right now. And then I'm gonna wrap the brown around the orange. Now the brown's over here in this hand. So now I'm gonna do the same thing, cross the brown over the orange again. And notice I made like a little hole. I'm gonna bring the brown string around and through that hole, that little end. And look, it made like this little, looks kind of like a little square. It's kind of hard to see. And that's the knot. I wanna pull it as tight as I possibly can, okay? And then these 2 ends, before you trim them, make sure that your knot is actually tight. So look how far away I trimmed them. You can leave it a little bit longer than that if you want. And then I can put my needle back on the long end of this yarn. If you ever have trouble getting your yarn in the needle, make a little loop like this. Make it like a little nub. Push the nub through the eye of the needle. And then now I'm gonna knot the yarn onto here. Once, twice. Now I'm ready to continue weaving. So I wanna pick up right where I left off. I don't even wanna pay attention to the fact that I changed colors, right? That has nothing to do with the pattern, right? The pattern continues. So I left off here, going over. Now I'm gonna go onto this side, going under first.